My name is Allegra Fletcher. I'm 36 years old. If you're listening from somewhere far away, drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this has traveled. And please, stay with me until the end. Last month, my parents flew across the country to watch my sister unpack boxes in her new vacation condo. They booked exit row seats for the extra leg room. They stayed 10 days. They documented every single moment on Facebook. The sunset from the balcony, the new furniture, the proud captions. 3 weeks later, my father called to tell me they wouldn't be coming to my wedding. The reason? A 35-minute drive was too hard on my mother's back. Let me say that again so it lands the way it landed for me. They sat in an airplane for hours, flew across the country, spent 10 days walking around Scottsdale in the heat for a housewarming party. But a 35-minute drive on a Saturday afternoon, on an empty road, to watch me get married, that was too much. I walked down the aisle while 2 seats sat empty in the front row. Left side, aisle seats, the most visible chairs in the entire chapel. My father-in-law, Stuart Hartley, was the one who took my arm. His hand was shaking slightly, not from nerves, I realized later, but from anger. Quiet, controlled, righteous anger on my behalf. I looked at those 2 empty chairs as I passed them. I didn't look away. I didn't speed up. I let every single one of the 76 people in that chapel see exactly what they were looking at. 2 parents who chose not to come. But to understand how we got there, to understand why those chairs were empty and what happened in the 3 weeks after, you need to know where this story really begins. It begins the day my sister Cambria came home from the hospital. I was 6 years old when my parents brought Cambria home. I remember standing in the doorway of the living room, holding my stuffed bear, a brown one with a worn patch on his left ear from too many years of being carried everywhere. I remember the way my mother walked through the front door, moving carefully, like she was carrying something infinitely precious. Her eyes were fixed on the bundle in her arms with an expression I had never seen on her face before. I had no word for it at 6 years old. Now I do. Reverence. She looked at Cambria the way you look at something you've been waiting for your entire life. Like the question she had been asking for years had finally been answered. I waited for her to look up, to look over, to see me standing there with my bear, waiting to meet my sister. She didn't look up for a long time. My father was right behind her, beaming, talking to my grandmother about the drive home from the hospital. My Aunt Patricia was already in the kitchen, starting on food. Everyone was moving, talking, laughing. I stood in the doorway and held my bear and waited. Eventually, my father noticed me. He came over, ruffled my hair, said, "Come meet your baby sister, Allie." I walked over. I looked down at Cambria's tiny red face. I said hi. My mother finally looked at me then. She smiled, warm but distracted, and said, "You're going to be such a good big sister." Then she looked back down at Cambria. I was a good big sister. I was very, very good at it. I practiced being good at everything in that house because I had already started to understand at 6 years old, with the particular radar that children develop when they need to survive their own families, that being good was the only currency I had. The Christmas I was 7, Cambria was 1. I had been asking for a specific dollhouse since October. Not vaguely, specifically. I had found it in a catalog that came in the mail, had dog-eared the page, had carried the catalog around the house for 2 weeks, pointing at it until my mother gently took it from me and said she'd pass my list along to Santa. It was the kind of dollhouse that had real working lights inside. Little furniture you could move from room to room. A tiny kitchen with a miniature refrigerator. A pink roof and green shutters. I had memorized every detail of that photograph. Christmas morning, I came downstairs and it was there. I stood in the living room in my pajamas and I looked at it, and I felt something pure and uncomplicated that I would spend years chasing. The feeling of being heard. Then my mother said, "We're going to put this in Cambria's room." I looked at her. "Santa brought it for the house," she said, adjusting the ribbon on her robe, not quite meeting my eyes. "And Cambria's room needs more things. You're such a big girl now, Allegra, you understand. Babies need more. She can't even appreciate her gifts yet, so this will be perfect in her room until she's old enough. I got a coloring book, 12 pages, the kind with the thick outlines meant for children younger than me. It cost, I later learned, $9. I said, "Okay, Mommy." I was 7. I didn't have the language yet. I didn't know words like favoritism or inequity or the particular cruelty of being told your needs matter less because you're capable enough to survive without them being met. I just knew that the dollhouse was in Cambria's room and I was holding a coloring book. I never touched that dollhouse. Not once in the 9 years it sat in Cambria's room. I told myself it was because I didn't want it anymore. That was the first lie I told myself in a long series of lies designed to make the truth more bearable. The truth was simpler and harder. If I didn't want it, it couldn't be taken from me. By the time Cambria and I were both in school, the shape of our family had become clear enough that even outsiders could see it, though no one said anything out loud. Teachers would sometimes look between us, me with my library books and my careful homework, Cambria with her easy charm and her mother's eyes, and there would be this small pause, this micro-hesitation, before they treated us like sisters. We looked alike enough to be clearly related, but we moved through our parents' world like we belonged to different families. Let me tell you what I mean. When Cambria started high school, my parents enrolled her at St. Catherine's Preparatory Academy. It was a private Catholic school on the north side of the city. Small class sizes, excellent college placement rates, a campus with actual grass and a performing arts building. The kind of school that sends out glossy brochures. Tuition, $19,500 a year. My mother's explanation, delivered with the casual certainty of someone who had rehearsed it until it felt like fact. Cambria is more sensitive. She needs a smaller environment, smaller classes, more individual attention. Cambria is more sensitive. I had heard versions of this my entire life. Cambria needed more because Cambria felt things more. Cambria required more investment because Cambria was more delicate. The implicit other half of every sentence, never spoken but always present, was, "And you don't, Allegra. You're strong. You're capable. You'll be fine anywhere." I went to Roosevelt High. Public school. Free, or as close to free as public school gets. It was a perfectly adequate school. I got a good education there. I had good teachers. But I also had 42 students in my junior year AP English class because they'd cut the budget again. And I shared a locker with someone I'd never met because there weren't enough to go around. And I worked at Hanratty's Grocery 18 hours a week from sophomore year onward because I had started understanding that no one was going to hand me the future I wanted. Cambria was driven to St. Catherine's every morning in the Honda Civic my parents bought her the summer she turned 16. For safety, my mother said, so she's not taking the bus. I took the bus. I kept a running tally in a small notebook I hid in the back of my desk drawer. Not out of bitterness, or not only out of bitterness, more like documentation. The way you document things when you sense that someday you might need proof that you didn't imagine all of this. 4 years of St. Catherine's tuition, $78,000. The Honda Civic, $22,000. Total spent on Cambria before either of us set foot in a college classroom, $100,000. I had my grocery store paychecks and a notebook full of numbers I couldn't yet make sense of. Then came college. I applied to 6 schools. I got into the University of Iowa with a $16,000 merit scholarship. I was proud of that scholarship. I had worked hard for it, stayed up late, filled out every form myself, written every essay without help because there was no one to help me. The remaining cost, $54,000 over 4 years, I covered with federal student loans. I also applied to be a resident advisor in the dormitories to cover room and board. The application process was competitive. I got it. I counseled homesick freshmen through their first nights away from home, broke up arguments about noise at midnight, attended mandatory training sessions, and stayed on call 3 nights a week. In exchange, I got a single room and a meal plan. I also worked 15 hours a week at the campus library, reshelving books and helping students with research requests, because the RA stipend didn't cover textbooks, and my grocery budget was already down to the bone. Junior year, I found out about a summer intensive program at the University of Edinburgh. 6 weeks, academic credit, An experience that could have opened doors I didn't even know existed yet. The cost was $4,200. I had saved $2,000 from my stipend. I called my father. "I just need $2,200 more," I said. "I've already got almost half." There was a pause. I can still hear exactly how long that pause was. "Allegra, we're stretched pretty thin right now," he said. "Your sister needs a new laptop for school." Cambria was 14 years old. She was in 9th grade at St. Catherine's. I didn't go to Edinburgh. I spent that summer working double shifts at the library and taking a summer course to stay on track for graduation. Cambria got a MacBook. 2 years after I started at Iowa, Cambria enrolled there as well. She was 18. It was exactly 6 years after I had started, which made sense, because she was 6 years younger than me. My parents paid everything: tuition, room and board, books, a monthly spending allowance, and in her junior year, a semester abroad in Florence, Italy. $28,000 for one semester. I remember the exact moment I found out about Florence. I was sitting at my kitchen table in my small apartment, working out whether I could put an extra $40 toward my loan payment that month, or whether I needed to keep it as a buffer for utilities. My mother mentioned it in a phone call, casually, like she was reporting the weather. "Cambria's so excited about Florence. It's going to be such a wonderful experience for her." I said, "That's great, Mom." I hung up and sat very still for a while. $28,000. While I had been eating ramen 4 nights a week and wearing my winter coat inside my apartment to save on heating costs, I did the math later the way I always did. 4 years of Iowa for Cambria, plus Florence, $88,000, not counting the laptop, not counting the spending money, not counting 100 other small expenses I didn't know about. I graduated with a bachelor's degree and honors and $54,000 in federal student loans. I went straight into a master's program in higher education administration because I needed the credential to advance in the field I wanted. Another $37,000 borrowed. Total, when I walked across the stage at my master's graduation, $91,000. My parents came to the ceremony. They sat in the bleachers and watched me accept my diploma. Afterward, my mother said they couldn't stay for the dinner I'd made reservations for because they had promised to help Cambria move into her new apartment that afternoon. Cambria had graduated the previous spring. She'd taken 5 years to finish her degree, which my parents had paid for in full, every semester without question. I stood in the parking lot in my cap and gown and watched their car pull out of the lot. $91,000. That was the price of my education. I drove home alone, changed out of my gown, and made myself a cup of tea. I sat at my kitchen table, and I did what I had always done. I told myself I was fine. I told myself I didn't need them to stay for dinner. I told myself that independence was a gift, even when it was handed to you the hard way. I was good at telling myself things. I started working in the admissions office at the University of Iowa the fall after my master's graduation. Entry level, $39,000 a year. I helped first-generation students navigate financial aid applications, scholarship searches, the bewildering landscape of federal loan programs. I understood those students in a way that wasn't theoretical. I was good at the job. I moved up. By my early 30s, I was a senior admissions counselor, making $68,000 a year. Stable, respectable, mine. I had been making regular loan payments since the month after I graduated. $740 a month, every month, without fail. About 18 months into my first job, my father called. The tone was warm, conversational, the tone he used when he wanted something and was hoping I wouldn't notice that he wanted something. He asked how work was going. He asked about my apartment. Then, almost as an afterthought, "Your mother and I have been a little squeezed with bills lately. You know how it is. If you were able to help out a little, just monthly, nothing major, it would mean a lot to us. $400 a month." I said yes. Of course I said yes. They were my parents. That's what family does, I told myself. You help when people need help. What I didn't examine too closely was the fact that I was making $39,000 a year and paying $740 a month in student loans, and now $400 a month to my parents. which left me with a budget that required very careful management and no room for emergencies. I sent that $400 every single month for years. I never missed a payment. Even the winter, my heating bills spiked, and I genuinely could not cover both the payment and keep my apartment warm. I sent the $400. I wore my coat inside. I didn't complain. They never said thank you. Not once. It wasn't framed as something to be grateful for. It was framed as something expected. The one time I was 3 days late because of a bank processing issue, my mother called to ask if everything was okay with the usual. Not, "Are you okay, Allegra?" Not, "How are you managing?" Just, "Where's the money?" My mother called me once a month reliably, like clockwork. The calls were brief. They covered the same topics in roughly the same order. The weather, something Cambria was doing, whether I had sent the usual yet. Occasionally she would mention that Cambria had posted something funny on Facebook, or that Cambria's husband, she didn't have one yet, but my mother was already planning for it the way you plan for a certain future, would need to be someone stable. She called Cambria 3 times a week. I knew this because Cambria mentioned it once, casually, not registering that it might sting. I kept doing my job. I kept paying my loans. I kept sending $400 a month to people who called me primarily to make sure the check was coming. And I kept telling myself I was fine. I met Declan Hartley at a community book club on a Tuesday evening in early fall. He was tall, a little rumpled in the way that English teachers often are. Like his mind was always slightly somewhere else, caught in a sentence he was still working out. He taught high school English on the east side of the city. He had student loans of his own, $47,000 from his bachelor's degree, and a sense of humor about it that I recognized immediately as the specific humor of someone who has learned to laugh at the things that hurt. We argued about a novel on our first night. I thought the ending was a failure of nerve. He thought it was the only honest ending possible. We were both right. That was the beginning. 3 months in, he met my parents at a dinner. He was quiet on the drive home afterward. I had learned to read his silences. There was the comfortable one, when he was just thinking, and the deliberate one, when he was choosing his words carefully because he knew they mattered. This was the deliberate one. Your parents seem, he paused, distant. They're just not very demonstrative. Your mom took 3 phone calls from Cambria during dinner. She picked up every time. Cambria calls a lot. When you mentioned your promotion, your dad said that's nice and went back to his food. Another pause. You'd just told him you'd been promoted to senior admissions counselor, that you'd worked toward it for years. That's just how he is? Declan was quiet for another block. When Cambria sent a group text about buying new patio furniture, I watched your mom respond with about 15 exclamation points. You told me last week that when you sent your birthday message, she responded 6 hours later. She's busy. He didn't push it, but he noticed things. He kept noticing them quietly, the way good people do when they love you and they see something you've trained yourself not to see. The first time he said, "You don't have to send them that money every month." We were sitting on my couch on a Sunday evening, and I felt something tighten in my chest, the way it does when someone says something true that you're not ready for. "They're my parents," I said. "Ed, it's what family does. Family is supposed to go both ways, Allegra. I know that. I don't think you do. Not yet." I wasn't ready to hear it. I changed the subject. He let me. That was one of the things I loved most about Declan. He knew the difference between the right time and the right truth, and he understood that sometimes you had to wait for both to align. Cambria married Garrett Sullivan in the spring, 3 years before my own wedding. Garrett was in commercial real estate development. He was pleasant enough, handsome, confident, the kind of man who fills a room with the certainty that the room is glad he's there. His income was substantial. The wedding was $38,000. My parents contributed $13,000 to Cambria's wedding. They also asked me, 2 weeks before the event, to cover the cost of the wedding gift they'd chosen on Cambria's behalf. A china set from a bridal registry, $8,700. "We'll pay you back," my father said. "Just until things settle after the wedding expenses." I covered it. I put it on a credit card I had to pay down over the next 4 months. They did not pay me back. My mother posted 91 photographs from Cambria's wedding on Facebook within 48 hours of the reception. She wore 2 different dresses, one for the ceremony, one for the reception, and appeared in nearly every frame with the look of a woman whose life had arrived exactly where she had intended it to go. When Declan and I got engaged the following summer, I sent a group text to the family. My mother responded 6 hours later with a single line. "That's nice, honey. Does Declan have good insurance?" Teachers don't always make much. That was it. No phone call, no visit. One line about insurance. Cambria and Garrett bought a house, 4,800 square feet, $500,000. My mother drove 2 hours to visit them every 6 or 7 weeks. She visited me in Iowa City twice in an entire year, and both times she left before 2 hours were up, citing the drive home. The same drive she made to Cambria's house, twice as long, every other month. Then came October. Cambria and Garrett bought a vacation condo in Scottsdale, Arizona. 3 bedrooms, $355,000. My mother sent a group text to the entire extended family, including me, that read, "Big news! Cambria and Garrett bought a second home in Scottsdale. We're flying out for the housewarming. So proud of our girl." My wedding invitations had gone out 5 weeks earlier. There had been no group text about that. My parents booked their flights to Scottsdale. They upgraded to exit row seats for the extra leg room, $45 each way. They flew out, changed planes in Chicago, arrived in Phoenix. They stayed 10 days. My mother documented everything on Facebook, 51 photographs, captions like "Family time is the best time," and "Blessed beyond measure," and "Can't believe our vacation is almost over." I saw every post. I read every caption. My wedding was 3 weeks away. I texted my mother the day they got home. "Welcome back. How was the trip?" She responded 6 hours later. "Wonderful. Madison's place is..." She had written Madison before correcting herself. "Cambria's place is beautiful. We're exhausted, though. Travel really takes it out of us at our age." I read that text standing in my kitchen. I read it again. Then I put my phone down and went back to addressing wedding envelopes. I knew. Right then. I knew what was coming. I just wasn't ready to admit it yet. 12 days before my wedding, my mother called on a Tuesday evening. I was sitting at my kitchen table, going over the final seating chart, moving names around the way you do in the last stretch before a wedding when you're trying to remember who doesn't speak to whom and which uncle needs to be near the exit. Declan was in the other room grading papers. The apartment smelled like the pasta he'd made for dinner. It was a quiet, ordinary evening, and I remember it that way because ordinary evenings have a particular quality right before everything shifts. I picked up on the second ring. "Allegra, honey." My mother's voice was warm in that specific way it got when she was working toward something. Not cold. Never cold. Just slightly too warm. The way a room feels when someone has turned up the heat to compensate for a draft they don't want to acknowledge. I was just looking at the invitation again. 2 o'clock, right? 2 o'clock. Yes. I've sent the schedule twice, Mom. Right. I just wanted to make sure. A pause. I could hear her moving around her kitchen, the familiar sound of cabinet doors and the faucet. "And it's in Iowa City." "It's in Iowa City. Same city I've lived in for 12 years. Same city you've driven to before." "Well, yes. But it's a bit of a drive from here." Something in my stomach went still. "It's 35 minutes, Mom." "It feels longer, honestly. Especially when you're our age." She laughed a little, the kind of laugh that isn't really a laugh. "Your father's back has been bothering him, and you know my sciatica. You just spent 10 days in Scottsdale. You walked around in the heat for a week and a half." "That's different. We were staying there. We weren't driving back and forth." "You flew. You sat in an airplane for hours each way." "Exit row seats, so there was plenty of room." She said it without any apparent awareness of how it sounded. I put down my pen, very carefully, the way you put something down when your hands are not entirely steady. "Mom, we just want to make sure we can manage it comfortably, that's all. You know how much we want to be there." I'll see you on the 22nd, I said. Goodbye, Mom. I hung up before she could hear what was happening to my voice. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time without moving. The seating chart was in front of me. 2 names in the front row, left side, aisle seats, Neville Fletcher, Karina Fletcher. Declan appeared in the doorway. He looked at my face. What happened? I don't think they're coming. He crossed the room and sat down across from me. They RSVP'd Allegra. They said they were coming. I know what they said. I looked up at him. I know my parents. He didn't argue with me. He reached across the table and covered my hand with his. We sat like that for a while, the seating chart between us, 2 names in the front row that I was already somewhere in the back of my mind, beginning to erase. Four days before the wedding, my father called my office line at 2:47 in the afternoon. My father never called my office. Dorothy Calloway, my assistant who had worked with me for 4 years and knew me well enough to read weather in my expression, buzzed through on the intercom. Allegra, your dad is on line 2, says it's about the weekend. I picked up. Nancy? He caught himself. Allegra, sorry, hi. Hi, Dad. I need to talk to you about Saturday. Okay? I already knew. I had known for 4 days. But I needed to hear him say it out loud, because some things need to be said out loud to become real, and some truths you need to receive directly rather than absorb gradually, because absorbing them gradually lets people off the hook for delivering them. Your mother's sciatica has been really flaring up. The doctor said she shouldn't be sitting in the car for extended periods. Dad, it's 35 minutes. Well, with traffic, it can be closer to 45. There is no traffic on that road on a Saturday afternoon. I have driven it 100 times. It is 35 minutes. Allegra, don't make this harder than it needs to be. Your mother is in pain. I pressed my free hand flat on the surface of my desk. I could feel my pulse in my palm. You flew to Arizona. You were gone for 10 days. You walked around Scottsdale. You went to Cambria's housewarming, and you flew there and flew back. And you sat in an airplane. That was different. How? A pause. We weren't driving, and besides, his voice shifted slightly, just a fraction, the way a foundation shifts before you see the cracks. Cambria needed us there. It was important to her. The words came out of me before I fully decided to say them. And my wedding isn't important to me? You have Declan's whole family coming. You'll have plenty of people there. Cambria doesn't have Garrett's family nearby the way you have the Hartleys. She needed the support. I looked out the window of my office. The campus was visible from where I sat, students crossing between buildings, a perfectly ordinary Wednesday afternoon. You're telling me, I said slowly, that my wedding matters less than my sister's housewarming party. I'm not saying that. You are saying that. Those are the exact words you are saying. Allegra. His voice took on a particular tone, one I had heard my whole life, the tone that meant, you are being unreasonable, and we both know it, so let's skip to the part where you accept that. You've always been the independent one. You've always been able to handle things. Your mother's health has to come first. You understand that. Something clarified in me, like a long, blurry image suddenly coming into focus. I understand perfectly, I said. Good. Relief in his voice. We'll send a nice gift, and we'll see you at Christmas. Goodbye, Dad. I put the phone down. I sat at my desk for 3 minutes. I know it was 3 minutes because I watched the clock on my computer. Then I opened the wedding seating chart file, found the front row, and deleted 2 names. I left the seats empty. I didn't move anyone else into those chairs. I didn't fill the space with a different name. I left them exactly as they were. 2 chairs, front row, left side, aisle seats. Visible from every angle in that chapel. I thought about what Declan had said months ago when I wasn't ready to hear it. Family is supposed to go both ways. I texted him, "They're not coming." His response was immediate. "Calling you now." I looked at the phone when it rang. Then I looked at the 3 students waiting outside my office. A first-generation freshman who needed help understanding her award letter, a junior trying to figure out how to appeal a financial aid decision, a sophomore who had emailed me twice that week because she was scared and didn't know who else to ask. I texted Declan back, "I'll tell you tonight. I have to work." Then I dried my eyes, stood up, straightened my jacket, and opened my office door. "Come on in," I said. "Let's figure this out." The next 2 days brought calls I hadn't expected. Uncle Raymond, my father's older brother, a plain-spoken man who had worked in construction for 30 years and had no patience for what he called family theater, called the evening after my father did. "Your dad told me," he said. "Said they're not making it to your wedding." "That's right." "He's a coward." Raymond said it the way he said most things, flatly, without drama, like he was reading a measurement off a level. "I'm 90 minutes away. If I can make it, they can make it. I'll be there Saturday. Tell me where to sit." "Uncle Raymond, you don't have to." "I'm sitting front row. You need someone in that row, and I'm the one who's going to be in it. I'll see you Saturday, Allegra." He hung up before I could argue. The day before the wedding, Miriam Hartley, Declan's mother, called. She had met me exactly 4 times before that phone call. She was a small woman with silver hair and a directness that reminded me of my grandmother in ways that made my chest ache. She didn't start with pleasantries. "Allegra, I want you to hear this clearly." Her voice was steady and warm. "You are family to us. Not future family, not almost family. You already are. And tomorrow, that chapel is going to be full of people who drove and flew and rearranged their weekends to watch you marry our son. Hold on to that, okay?" I held the phone against my ear and looked at the ceiling for a moment. "Okay," I said. "Thank you, Miriam." Miriam is for Tuesdays. Tomorrow you call me Mom. The morning of my wedding, I woke up in the Hartleys' guest room. Paige, Declan's younger sister, was doing my hair at the vanity mirror, humming something under her breath. Owen Blackwell, my closest friend from college, had arrived at 7 in the morning with a box of donuts and the specific energy of someone who has decided that today will be a good day by sheer force of will. Bryce Langford, my old college roommate, was in the kitchen making coffee and arguing cheerfully with Stuart Hartley about something that had nothing to do with anything important. The house was warm and loud and full. I checked my phone at 9. Nothing from my parents. I checked again at 10:30 while Paige was pinning my veil. Nothing. "You keep checking," Paige said, not unkindly. "I know." "They're not going to call, are they?" It wasn't quite a question. I met her eyes in the mirror. "No," I said. "They're not." She nodded, kept pinning, didn't push. I liked her enormously in that moment. I checked one last time at 11:47. Then I turned my phone off and put it in the bottom of my overnight bag, under everything else, where I wouldn't be tempted to reach for it. Uncle Raymond arrived at 12:30 in his good suit, the same one he'd worn to every family event for the past decade. Dark navy, slightly shiny at the elbows, entirely perfect. He walked in, looked at me in my dress, and pressed his lips together for a moment. "You look like your grandmother," he said. I had to look at the ceiling again. "Don't you start," Paige said, pointing at him with a hairpin. "We just did the mascara." At 1:30, Stuart Hartley knocked on the guest room door. I heard Owen tell him to hold on, and then the door opened and Stuart stood there in his suit, gray-haired and straight-backed, and when he looked at me, his expression was exactly the thing I'd been trying not to need all morning. "Allegra," he said, "I told you months ago it would be the honor of my life. I mean it even more now." I took his arm. My hands were steady. The chapel was a 100-year-old brick building on the east side of Iowa City. It seated 78. 76 people filled it. Faces I recognized. People who had driven and flown and rearranged their weekends. All of them turned toward the doors as the music started. And in the front row, left side, 2 empty chairs. I saw them the moment I stepped into the doorway with Stuart's arm in mine. They were exactly where I had left them on the seating chart. Aisle seats, most visible position in the room. I had not asked anyone to fill them or move them or cover them. I had left them empty on purpose because some absences deserved to be visible. I walked down that aisle and I looked at those chairs as I passed them. I did not speed up. I did not look away. I looked at them the way you look at something you've decided to stop being afraid of. The way you look at a scar you've stopped trying to hide. 76 people saw exactly what they were looking at. 2 empty chairs in the front row of a wedding that should have had parents in them. Declan was at the altar, and he was crying in the quiet way he cried. Not dramatically, just 2 tears that he didn't bother to wipe because he was smiling too much. Judge Patricia Summerfield, a family friend of the Hartleys, stood beside him. Uncle Raymond had moved himself from his assigned seat 5 rows back to the front row, filling some of the empty space, but not all of it. The chairs remained what they were. The ceremony was 29 minutes. When I said my vows, my voice cracked on to have and to hold. I felt Declan's hands tighten around mine. I found his eyes and I stayed there. We kissed. The room erupted. For 30 seconds, I forgot about the empty seats entirely. The reception was in the church fellowship hall. Simple food, round tables with white cloths, a speaker in the corner playing a playlist Owen had spent 3 weeks curating. 76 people eating and laughing and talking across tables in the particular way that happens at weddings where everyone is genuinely glad to be there. The photographer came to me during cocktail hour, tablet in hand, running through the shot list. Allegra, for the family portraits. Your parents, are they? They're not here. She looked up from her tablet. Oh, are they running late or they're not coming? A pause. I'm so sorry. Don't be. It's a beautiful day. Miriam Hartley appeared at my elbow approximately 30 seconds later with a flower arrangement from one of the reception tables and quietly repositioned it in the corner where the family portrait backdrop was set up, rearranging things so the gap wasn't visible in the photographs. I watched her do it. She didn't ask permission or make a production of it. She just saw a problem and solved it with grace. I touched her arm. She covered my hand with hers. Owen's toast came after dinner. He stood up with his glass and looked around the room for a moment before he spoke. Owen had known me for 15 years, through graduation and loans and the $400 payments, and the winters when I wore my coat inside. He had watched me build my life from the materials I had. To Allegra and Declan, he said, and to chosen family, the people who show up when it counts, who stay when it's hard, who love you without keeping score. He raised his glass. To the family we make. 76 glasses went up. I looked at the 2 empty chairs. Everyone had seen them. No one had said anything out loud. Some things are understood. Stuart and I danced to What a Wonderful World, the father-daughter dance, though he was not my father, and we had known each other less than 2 years. He held my hand in the formal dance-hold way, the way he must have learned a long time ago, and when I started to cry, he said nothing. He just held on. You're my daughter now, too, he said quietly. That's not a substitution. That's just what's true. I pressed my cheek briefly against his shoulder. 1 second. Then I straightened up because there were 76 people watching, and I was someone who had learned a long time ago to feel things fully, but not fall apart in public. We finished the dance. Everyone applauded. The 3 weeks after the wedding were quiet in a way that had weight to it. No call, no card, no gift, no message from either of my parents saying we're sorry we missed it, or congratulations, or even the minimum, the absolute floor of human acknowledgement. I heard it was beautiful. Nothing. On the 6th day after the wedding, Cambria sent a text. Hey, congrats on the wedding. Sorry we couldn't make it. As though she had been invited and had regretfully declined. As though her absence and our parents' absence were equivalent things that could be lumped into the same we. I stared at that text for a long moment. Then I put my phone down and went to make dinner. At the start of the following month, I sat down to pay my bills the way I did every month. Loans, utilities, car payment, credit card. I opened the transfer screen for the $400 I sent to my parents. I looked at it for a while. Then I closed the screen without completing the transfer. I sat back in my chair. My account balance looked strange to me with that extra $400 sitting in it, like something that had been in the wrong place for so long that finding it in the right place felt disorienting. For the first time in years, I did not send $400 to my parents. 5 days later, my father left a voicemail on my cell phone. I was at work when it came in. I listened to it at my desk with the door closed. Allegra, it's Dad. I noticed this month the usual payment didn't come through. I'm sure it's just an oversight. Probably got busy with everything after the wedding. Give me a call back when you get a chance. 12 seconds. I timed it. He called about the money. Not to say we're sorry we missed your wedding. Not to ask how are you doing? How is Declan? Was it beautiful? Did you have a good day? Not to offer any version of an apology or an acknowledgement or even a simple congratulations. Our daughter got married and we weren't there. He called to ask where the money was. I listened to that voicemail 3 times. Then I deleted it. I did not call back. The following week, a certified letter arrived at my parents' house from Crawford & Associates, estate attorneys. The subject line referenced the estate of Helen Whitmore, my grandmother's sister, my great-aunt, who had passed away quietly in early fall. I hadn't known her well. I'd seen her a handful of times at family gatherings over the years, a quiet woman who always seemed to be watching things from a comfortable distance. She had left $46,000 to be split between me and Cambria. The attorney was conducting standard due diligence in settling the estate. In the course of that due diligence, he had discovered a prior trust instrument, a UTM-A custodial account established decades earlier, naming me as beneficiary. He was requesting a full accounting. I did not know about this letter yet. I did not know about the trust, or the attorney, or any of it. But my father did. And he was terrified. On a Monday afternoon, 8 days after the certified letter arrived at my parents' house, Dot's voice came through my office intercom at 2:43. Allegra, your father is in the lobby. He says it's urgent family business. I stopped mid-sentence in the email I was writing. My father had never come to my office. In 12 years of working in this building, he had never once come here. I closed my laptop. I sat still for a moment. Tell him I'll be right down. I found him in the lobby by the front windows, standing rather than sitting, the way people stand when they're too wound up to settle. He was wearing his good khakis and the blue polo shirt he wore to things that mattered to him, Cambria's graduation, her wedding, her housewarming. His hair was grayer than I remembered, and thinner. He was holding a brown accordion folder with both hands, the kind that expands to hold hundreds of pages, and it was full, straining at the elastic. His hands were shaking. I gestured toward the small conference room off the lobby. Glass walls visible from the main office. I led him in. I did not sit down. He did. The folder sat on the table between us like something with its own weight. I know you're still upset about the wedding, he started. Is that what you came to talk about? He looked down at the folder. I came to talk about some estate matters. Your great-aunt Helen's estate. The attorney is asking questions about an old trust your grandmother set up. What trust? He opened the folder, slid a letter across the table, Crawford & Associates letterhead, dated 10 days earlier. I read it. The attorney was requesting a full accounting of a UTM-A custodial trust established in the name of Allegra Rose Fletcher, beneficiary, trust instrument dated and signed when I was 9 years old. I looked up. I didn't know about this trust. My father didn't answer. How much? I asked. He was quiet for long enough that Dot, visible through the glass, looked up from her desk to check on us. $150,000, he said. The number landed differently than I would have expected. Not with shock, exactly. More like recognition. The specific feeling of hearing the explanation for something that has confused you for a very long time. $150,000. A trust in my name. Set up when I was 9. And I had taken out $91,000 in student loans. Where is it? I said. He pushed more documents across the table. Bank statements. Multiple years. I picked up the first page. The withdrawals were listed in chronological order, each one labeled qualified education expense. I picked up my phone and searched St. Catherine's Preparatory Academy tuition. $19,500 per year. I looked at the first withdrawal, $19,500. The second, $19,500. The third year. The fourth. I kept scrolling. Florence, Italy semester, $28,000. University tuition, year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4. Every single withdrawal matched a Cambria expense, down to the semester, down to the amount. I set my phone down on the table. "This is Cambria's education," I said. "Family resources. This account has my name on it. My name. Not the family's name, not a joint account. My name. We were the custodians. We had discretion over how the funds were used for educational. Custodians are not owners." My voice was very even. I had not raised it once. I was aware of Dot through the glass, aware of the rest of my office beyond her, aware that I was at work and that I was going to hold this together. A custodian has a legal obligation to use the funds for the named beneficiary. That is what the law says. You know that? You've known it since the day you started withdrawing from this account. He opened his mouth. "Don't," I said. He said. He closed it. He reached into the folder one more time and produced a single sheet of paper, freshly printed, still slightly warm in the way paper is when it's come straight from a printer. A form. He slid it across. I read it. It was a beneficiary release and acknowledgement. Signed by me, it would state that I, Allegra Rose Fletcher, confirmed receipt of the full $150,000 from the custodial trust established by Rose Whitmore and released the estate from any further obligation, confirming all funds had been used appropriately for my educational expenses. You want me to sign this? The estate attorney needs it to close out your aunt's estate. It's standard procedure. It is not standard procedure. It is a legal document stating that I received money I never received, so that the estate can be closed cleanly and Cambria can collect her share of Aunt Helen's money without any complications. I set the paper down. You want me to lie? Allegra, you want me to sign a document that says you did nothing wrong, so that my sister can have more money. It's not, get out of my office. He stood up. His chair scraped back. He moved toward the door, and then he stopped. The way you stop when you've forgotten something, the automatic reach for the thing you came in with. And he turned back toward the table where the folder sat. I put my hand on it. Leave it. Those are my documents. They are documents proving that you withdrew $150,000 from an account that belonged to me and spent it on my sister's education while I took out $91,000 in student loans. I looked at him. You will not be taking this folder out of this room. He stood in the doorway. He looked at me for the first time that afternoon. Really looked. Not through or past, but directly at me. Something moved across his face. I didn't look away from it. Then he left. I heard his footsteps cross the lobby. I heard the front door open and close. I stood in the conference room for a moment with my hand still on the folder. Then I sat down because my legs had decided they were done pretending. Dot knocked softly on the glass 4 minutes later. She opened the door just enough to see me. "Honey, are you okay?" "Not yet," I said. "But I'm going to be." I pulled the folder toward me and began going through it properly, systematically, the way I went through financial aid files at work, methodically, looking for the full picture. At the very bottom of the folder, beneath the bank statements and the trust documents and the estate attorney's letters, there was an envelope, cream-colored, old, the edges slightly soft from decades of being kept in a folder. The flap was sealed, and across the front, in handwriting I recognized from birthday cards I had received as a child, careful, slightly shaky, the handwriting of someone who thought about each letter before committing it to paper. For Allegra, to be opened when you start college. With all my love, Grandma Rose. My hands stopped moving. The envelope had been sealed for years. Decades. It had been sitting at the bottom of this folder, buried under the evidence of what my parents had done. Waiting. I picked it up. It was lighter than I expected. I looked at it for a long moment. Then I carefully tore it open along the top. The paper inside was folded in thirds, the way letters used to be folded to fit an envelope. The pages had yellowed slightly at the edges, but the ink was clear and dark, every word still perfectly legible. I unfolded it. My dearest Allegra, today you are 9 years old. You came to my house after your birthday party and sat at my kitchen table and told me all about the presents you received. You told me about the coloring book, and you made your voice light when you said it, the way children do when they are practicing being cheerful about something that disappointed them. But I watched your eyes when you talked about Cambria's new bicycle, the red one with the basket and the bell, the one you told me you had asked for. I see things, sweetheart, things the adults around you are choosing not to see. Your mother loves you. I believe that with my whole heart. But love is not the same as attention, and attention is not the same as seeing someone clearly. Your mother sees Cambria clearly. She has from the beginning. With you, there is something that gets in the way. I don't know what it is, and I am not sure she knows either. But the result is the same. You are standing in a family that does not see you the way you deserve to be seen. This is not your fault. I want you to read that sentence again. This is not your fault. I am putting away $150,000 for your education. It is not a fortune, but it is enough to give you choices, enough to let you study what you love, enough that you will not have to begin your life underwater. This money is for you, not for the family, not for your sister, not for emergencies that somehow always end up benefiting everyone but you. For your future. I am making your parents the custodians because the law requires it. I am trusting them to do right by you. If they don't, if you are reading this letter and you still had to borrow money for school, if the account is empty when it should be full, I want you to know something. Fight for it. What belongs to you, you are allowed to take back. The law is on your side, and so am I, even from wherever I am when you read this. You are the most quietly remarkable person I know, Allegra. You have been solving your own problems since you were small enough that it broke my heart to watch. You deserve to be carried sometimes. You deserve to have someone smooth the path. I am sorry I could not do more. I am also leaving you my amethyst ring, the one I wore on my wedding day. Your mother will want it, but it belongs to you. Wear it, and remember what your grandmother said. You are worthy of every good thing. You deserve to be seen. You deserve to be chosen. If you are reading this, I am probably already gone. But I saw you, Allegra, every time you went quiet when Cambria got praised, every time you smiled through something that should have made you cry, every time you made yourself small so someone else could feel bigger. I saw you. I loved you. I wanted to protect you. You fight for what's yours. All my love, always. Grandma Rose P.S. Don't let anyone tell you that being strong means you don't need to be held. You can be both. I read it once, then I read it again. On the third reading, I stopped being able to see the words clearly, and I put my head down on the conference room table, on top of the bank statements and the trust documents and all the evidence of what had been taken, and I cried. Not the way I had cried after my parents' phone call. That had been the tight, controlled crying of someone who has learned to cry quietly so no one will hear. This was something else. This came from a place I had been pressing down for 30 years. The place that had been standing in doorways waiting to be noticed. The place that had eaten ramen and worn coats indoors and sent $400 a month and smiled through disappointment after disappointment. My grandmother had known. She had watched and she had seen. And she had tried to protect me. She had tried, from the distance of her kitchen table in my 9th year, to give me a future that no one could take away. They had taken it anyway, and she had known they might. That's why she wrote the letter. That's why she told me to fight. Dot knocked on the glass a long time later. I don't know exactly how long. The light in the conference room had changed. She opened the door carefully. "Honey?" I lifted my head. I must have looked exactly as wrecked as I felt, because she came in without asking and put her hand on my shoulder. "What did he want?" she asked quietly. "He wanted me to sign something, to lie about money that was mine, so my sister could have more." "What are you going to do?" I looked down at the letter in my hands. At my grandmother's handwriting, careful and clear, every letter placed with intention. What belongs to you, you are allowed to take back. I'm going to find a lawyer, I said. I pulled out my phone and texted Declan. Can you come home early? I need you. He responded in 45 seconds. Already leaving. I gathered every document from that folder, organized them in order, and held them against my chest as I stood up. For the first time since my father had walked into this building, I felt something shift. Not better, exactly. Not okay, but oriented, like a compass that had been spinning, finally finding north. I walked out of that conference room carrying everything. I was not afraid of what happened next. Declan was sitting at the kitchen table when I got home, still in his work clothes, a cup of coffee gone cold in front of him. He had left school early and driven straight home, and he had been waiting, which was exactly what I needed without having known I needed it. I set the accordion folder on the table between us. Read everything, I said. All of it. In order. He read for 40 minutes without speaking. I sat across from him and watched his face move through the documents, the way a weather system moves across an open field. Steady at first, then something gathering, then something that settled into a stillness that meant he had arrived at the full picture and was deciding what to do with it. He set the last page down, looked up at me. Allegra, I know. This isn't just wrong. This is legally wrong. UTMA custodians have a fiduciary duty. They are obligated by law to use those funds for the named beneficiary. Not for a sibling, not for the family. For you. What they did has a name. It's called breach of fiduciary duty, and depending on how a court looks at it, it could qualify as misappropriation of funds. I know. They wanted you to sign a form saying you received the money. I didn't sign it. Something went through his expression, relief and something fiercer underneath it. Good. Because if you had signed it, we would have had a much harder road. He looked back at the bank statements spread across the table. They spent your grandmother's money on Cambria's private school tuition, on her semester in Florence, on 4 years of college that you never received $1 toward while you were across town taking out loans and eating ramen 4 nights a week. He pressed his lips together, looked at the ceiling for a moment. We're finding you a lawyer tomorrow morning, he said. First thing. I already looked some up tonight. He reached across the table and took my hand. You're not doing this alone. I know. That's new, actually. I turned my hand over in his. That part is new. That evening, I thought about who else might be able to help build the case. The attorney would need more than bank statements and a trust document. He or she would need witnesses, people who could corroborate the circumstances, testify to what they knew, confirm the timeline. I sat with a notepad and thought through who knew what and when. Uncle Raymond came to mind immediately. I called him after dinner. Uncle Raymond, I need to ask you something about the trust my grandmother set up for me. A pause. Then with a heaviness that told me everything before he said a word. Finally. You knew. Your father told me about it when you were in college. Said he and your mother were, the phrase he used was reallocating family resources. I told him that was wrong, that the money had your name on it and it was not his to reallocate. Raymond's voice was even, the way it always was, but underneath it I could hear something that had been waiting a long time to be said. We didn't speak for almost 2 years after that conversation. Will you talk to my attorney? Give a statement about what he told you? I'll talk to your attorney. I'll give a statement. I'll sit in front of a judge if that's what it takes. A pause. I should have done more at the time, Allegra. I should have come to you directly. That's something I have to live with. You tried to stop him. I tried, and then I walked away when he didn't listen. That wasn't enough. His voice was quiet. You let me make this right now. Okay. Okay, I said. Thank you, Uncle Raymond. The next morning, I drove to the rectory of St. Michael's Parish and asked to speak with Father Joseph Calloway. Father Calloway had been the family's priest for as long as I could remember, A gentle, observant man in his late 60s who remembered every family he had served with the particular precision of someone who has paid close attention to people for decades. He offered me tea. I sat across from him in his small office and told him what I had found. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, looking down at his hands. "Your grandmother came to me when she was setting up that trust," he said finally. "She asked me to be a witness when she signed the documents. I was." He looked up. "She was very clear about her intentions, Allegra, very deliberate. She told me she was worried about you, about the way things were in your family, about whether your parents would do right by you. She said she was hoping they would, but she said she wanted someone outside the family to know the truth, in case they didn't." "She told you that directly?" "She told me she was setting aside money specifically for you, that it was not to be used for any other purpose, and that if anyone ever came to me asking what she had intended, I was to tell them exactly this. The money was for Allegra, not for the family, for Allegra." I sat with that for a moment. My grandmother, at the end of her life, had thought ahead to the possibility of this exact conversation. She had laid breadcrumbs. She had built a record. She had prepared for the fight she hoped I would never have to have. "Will you give a statement to my attorney?" I asked. "I will give whatever statement is needed," Father Calloway said. "And I will tell the truth, which is exactly what your grandmother asked me to do." The offices of Greer and Associates were on the 4th floor of a building downtown. Small firm, 3 attorneys, the kind of practice that handles the cases that require someone who knows the law precisely and isn't interested in theater. Sylvia Greer was 54 years old, gray hair and a low bun, reading glasses on a chain. The kind of woman who had clearly spent 30 years in rooms where people underestimated her and had long since stopped noticing, because the outcomes spoke for themselves. She read through everything I brought: the trust document, the bank statements, the estate attorney's letter, the release form my father had wanted me to sign. And she took notes on a legal pad in small, neat handwriting. She asked questions in the precise, unhurried way of someone who already knows where the answers are leading and is building the path methodically. When she finished, she set her pen down and looked at me. "You have a strong case. Walk me through it. Your grandmother established a Uniform Transfers to Minors Act custodial account for your benefit. Under Iowa law, UTMA custodians have a clear fiduciary obligation. They are legally required to manage and distribute those funds solely for the benefit of the named beneficiary. Your parents were the custodians. They had discretion over timing and specific use, but that discretion was bounded by law. The money had to be used for you, not for another child, not for general family expenses, not for your sister's education. They'll argue that education is education, that they were providing for both daughters. They can argue that. A court will reject it. The beneficiary designation is not decorative. It is the legal instrument that defines who the money belongs to. Using those funds for Cambria's expenses was a violation of their fiduciary duty, regardless of their intentions. She paused. "Now, there is a procedural question I want to address before you ask it, because I suspect you will. Why didn't the account automatically transfer to me when I came of age?" She nodded. "Your grandmother included a specific provision in the trust instrument extending custodial management until your 25th birthday, with the stated purpose of ensuring the funds were used for higher education, rather than transferred in a lump sum to an 18-year-old. It was an unusual provision, but entirely legal at the time it was drafted. It also meant that all account correspondence went to the custodians, your parents, rather than to you directly. You received no statements, no notices, no documentation. They controlled the information. Completely. And by the time you were 25, the account was empty. There was nothing to transfer." I sat with that for a moment. My grandmother had tried to be thoughtful, careful, protective, and that very carefulness had given my parents the window they needed. "What are my options?" Sylvia picked up her pen. "We send a demand letter outlining the breach of fiduciary duty and demanding full restitution. We give them 30 days to respond. If they settle, you receive compensation within a few months. If they refuse or stall, we file a civil suit. Under Iowa law, you would be entitled to the original trust balance, applicable interest over the period of misappropriation, and potentially your legal fees. Depending on the court's findings, punitive damages are also possible. What would the demand include? She turned her legal pad toward me. The numbers were already written out. Principal, $150,000. Interest calculated from the date of first withdrawal to present at standard rate, $41,000. Student loan interest paid by Allegra on debt she should not have needed to take on, $34,400. Estimated legal fees, $18,000. Total demand, $243,400. I read it twice. And the corroborating witnesses, Raymond Fletcher and Father Calloway, their statements will support the claim that the misappropriation was deliberate and known. They established that your father was aware the funds belonged to you specifically, that he was informed the reallocation was legally improper, and that he proceeded regardless. That matters. It moves this from negligence toward willful breach. She looked at me steadily. Allegra, I want to be straightforward with you. This is a winnable case. The documentation is unusually complete. Most breach of fiduciary duty claims rely heavily on circumstantial evidence and testimony. You have bank statements that match Cambria's educational expenses line by line. You have a witnessed trust instrument. You have a handwritten letter from the grantor stating her explicit intentions. That letter alone is remarkable. My grandmother made sure there was a record. She did. And it may be the single most important document in this file. Sylvia paused. Do you want to proceed? I thought about the ramen, the coat worn indoors, the Edinburgh program I didn't go to because Cambria needed a laptop, the $740 a month for years, the $400 a month on top of that, the 2 empty chairs in the front row of my wedding, the letter, what belongs to you, you are allowed to take back. Send the letter, I said. The demand letter went out by certified mail and email on a Thursday, 12 days after my father had come to my office. Sylvia had written it in the measured, precise language of legal correspondence. No drama, no emotional appeals, just facts and statutes and a clear accounting of what had occurred and what was being demanded. Reading it felt like watching something that had lived only inside my body for years become visible and formal and real in the world. They had 30 days to respond. My mother called 4 days after the letter arrived. I was in the kitchen making coffee when my phone lit up with her name. I stood and looked at it for 2 rings, 3 rings. Then I answered. How could you do this? It was not a question. Her voice had the quality of someone who had been rehearsing a conversation and had decided, somewhere in the rehearsal, that offense was the better posture. How could you do this to your own family? Mom, we could lose our house, Allegra. Is that what you want? Your parents out on the street? I want the $150,000 my grandmother left me for college. The money that was in an account with my name on it. That is what I want. We used that money for education, for both our daughters. We did what we thought was right for this family. You did what was right for Cambria. You have consistently, my entire life, done what was right for Cambria. And you used my money to do it. Family resources. Mom, my voice was very calm. I had not planned for it to be calm, but it was. I borrowed $91,000 for my education. I have been paying $740 a month for years. I sent you $400 a month on top of that, while wearing my coat inside my apartment in the winter because I couldn't afford both heat and the payments. And all of that time, there was money that belonged to me sitting in an account you were emptying for Cambria's private school and her semester in Italy. I paused. What would you like me to say to that? Silence. If you go through with this lawsuit, you will tear this family apart. Her voice had shifted, still insistent, but underneath it something thinner. You will destroy everything. I didn't destroy anything, Mom. I'm asking for what's mine. What you destroyed was something else, and you did it long before I filed any paperwork. A longer silence. Please, she said, and the word was smaller than I had ever heard her voice. We'll pay you back, over time. Just drop the lawsuit. Talk to your father. Talk to my attorney, I said. Goodbye, Mom. I ended the call. I stood in my kitchen for a moment with the phone in my hand. Then I set it on the counter, poured my coffee, and blocked her number. I waited for the guilt. The particular guilt that had been my companion since childhood. The one that said, "You are asking for too much. You are being selfish. Good daughters don't do this." It didn't come. What came instead was something quieter and more solid. Something that felt, after a lifetime of its absence, almost like peace. Cambria called 2 days after my mother did. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Maybe the last residue of hoping that she would surprise me. "Allegra," her voice was careful. "I didn't know about the trust. I want you to know that. Mom and Dad never told me where the money came from. I didn't know it had your name on it." "I believe you," I said. And I did, mostly. "But Cambria, you knew I had student loans. You knew I was working all through college. You knew I sent money to Mom and Dad every month while I was still paying off my own debt. You knew all of that, and you never asked why things were so different for us." A pause. "I thought they just helped us differently. I thought maybe you got other things." "What other things? What did I get?" She was quiet. "I'm not saying this to hurt you," I said. "I genuinely am not. But you benefited from money that was mine without ever questioning where it came from or whether it was fair. I'm not asking you to pay it back. I'm asking our parents to do that. But I need you to understand that this happened. If they lose the house, then they will find somewhere else to live. They are 64 and 66 years old, and they are healthy. They have options. What I had when I was 22 and starting my life with $91,000 of debt was considerably fewer options." A long silence. "You were always jealous of me." Her voice had changed. Not cruel, but resigned, like she was stating a fact she'd known for a long time. "Yes," I sassy said. I was jealous that you had parents who showed up, who paid attention, who flew across the country to watch you unpack boxes and wouldn't drive 35 minutes to watch me get married." I paused. "I was jealous of the version of our parents that you got, not of you." Another silence. "That's why they like me better," she said quietly, almost to herself. The words landed without the force they might once have had. Because I had known it my whole life. Because knowing it had been the silent fact at the center of every holiday dinner and every empty voicemail and every $9 coloring book. The fact that no one had ever said out loud. "I know," I said. Then I said goodbye, and I ended the call, and I sat with the particular quiet of something that had been spoken for the first time. It didn't fix anything, but there was something almost clean about finally hearing it said. 6 weeks after the demand letter went out, Sylvia called me on a Tuesday morning. Their attorney reached out. They want to settle. I was at my desk at work. I turned my chair to face the window. "Already?" They reviewed the full evidence package, the bank statements, the trust instrument, the letter from your grandmother, the affidavits from Raymond Fletcher and Father Calloway. Their attorney knows what a jury would do with this. Sylvia paused. There's also the matter of public record. A civil trial means documents become publicly accessible. They don't want that. What are they offering? Full principal restitution, the $150,000, plus the $41,000 in calculated interest. They're asking us to waive the student loan interest claim and the legal fees. Total settlement, $191,000. I looked out the window. Students were crossing the quad below, backpacks and coffee cups, the ordinary motion of a Tuesday morning. "What do you recommend?" "I recommend you take it." Her voice was measured, as it always was, but underneath it I heard something clear. "You could push for the full amount. Another 6 to 12 months, a trial, more stress, for an additional $52,000. In my professional opinion, the money is not worth the cost in time and toll. This settlement requires them to acknowledge in writing that they improperly withdrew funds from your custodial account. That acknowledgement is real. That is them admitting, in a legally binding document, that they were wrong. It says that? Explicitly? It states that Neville and Karina Fletcher acknowledge withdrawing funds from the UTMA custodial account of Allegra Rose Fletcher for purposes unrelated to the named beneficiary's education and agree to full restitution. In legal language, that is a confession. I was quiet for a moment. And Cambria's share of Aunt Helen's estate? Under the terms of the settlement and given the findings regarding the trust, the estate distribution will reflect the full accounting. You receive the complete $46,000 from Helen Whitmore's estate. Cambria receives nothing, as her educational expenses were covered by funds improperly diverted from your trust. A fact now part of the official record. To pay the settlement, I already knew my parents would need to sell the house they had lived in since before I was born. The house was worth approximately $330,000. After the settlement payment and transaction costs, they would have enough left to establish themselves in a rental. They would be uncomfortable. They would be diminished. They would have to explain to people they knew why they had sold the house. That was the consequence of what they had done. I had not set it in motion to punish them. I had set it in motion to take back what was mine. The consequences were the consequences. "Kai," I said. "I'll draw up the paperwork," Sylvia said. "Well done, Allegra. My grandmother did the hard work, 40 years ago." The settlement was signed on a Friday afternoon in Sylvia's office. I sat at a conference table and initialed and signed 14 pages of legal documents while Sylvia's paralegal notarized each one. It took 22 minutes. Outside the window, the city went about its business. Somewhere my parents were signing the same documents at a table with their own attorney. I drove home and told Declan it was done. He held me for a long moment without saying anything. Then he said, "How do you feel?" I thought about it. Like I've been carrying something for 30 years and I just put it down, and my arms don't know what to do yet. He laughed a little. I laughed too. It felt unfamiliar, and then it felt exactly right. The first check arrived on a Thursday morning, delivered by courier to my office just before 11. $110,000. A bank check, printed formally, the kind that has to be accepted. In the from field, Neville James Fletcher and Karina Ann Fletcher. In the memo line, settlement payment 1 of 2. Dot brought it to my office and set it on my desk without comment. She had known in the broad strokes what was happening. She had watched my father come and go from this building. She had seen me walk out of the conference room that day, carrying a folder and a letter and a particular look on my face. She looked at the check, then at me. "You okay?" she asked. "Yes," I said, and meant it. I called Declan. The check came. "I'll meet you at the bank at 2. I looked at the check for a while before I put it in my bag. I had held checks before, for my salary, for grants, for the fellowship I had received in graduate school. I had never held one that felt like this, like something returned, like something that had been taken from me a long time ago and had finally, by some combination of legal process and my grandmother's foresight and my own refusal to sign a lie, found its way back. 10. Hills Bank, downtown A Branch, 2:15 in the afternoon. The teller processed the deposit with the efficient cheer of someone who spends their days moving money from one place to another and does not always know the stories behind the numbers. When she confirmed the transaction, she looked up and smiled. "Congratulations, that's a significant deposit." "Thank you," I said. Declan took a photograph of the deposit confirmation screen with his phone. I looked at my account balance for a moment. 6 figures, the first time in my life I had ever seen that. And I felt the number not as wealth, but as correction, as a record being set right. Then I opened the student loan servicer on my phone. Current balance, $91,243.17. I had watched that number for years. I had made $740 payments against it month after month after month, watching it decrease with the particular slowness of high-interest debt, calculating and recalculating how many years remained. That number had been a fixed feature of my financial landscape for so long that it had started to feel permanent, like weather, like something you planned around rather than something you could change. I entered a payment amount, $91,243.17. Pay in full. Are you sure you want to make this payment? Do it, Declan said. He was looking over my shoulder, his hand on my back. I pressed confirm. Payment processing. 5 seconds. Payment successful. Your current balance is $0. I stared at the screen. 0. Not reduced, not partially paid, not great progress. Keep going. 0. Done. Gone. The entire weight of it, the full accumulated cost of being the daughter who had to borrow what should have been given. Gone in the time it takes to press a button. I stood in the bank lobby on a Thursday afternoon and I could not speak for a moment. Hey, Declan said quietly. He turned me toward him. Hey, look at me. I looked at him. His eyes were bright. It's gone, I said. It's gone. You're free. I pressed my face against his shoulder for approximately 4 seconds, which was all I would allow myself in a public bank lobby. Then I straightened up. Your turn, I said. Allegra, $47,230. I was already navigating to the payment screen for his servicer, which I had bookmarked 3 days earlier when I had decided I was going to do this. We start with nothing owed to anyone. That's how we begin. You don't have to. I know I don't have to. That's the point. We do things because we want to now. I looked up at him. Let me do this. He was quiet for a moment. Okay, he said. I paid off his loans. $47,230. Confirm. Payment successful. Balance 0. We walked out of the bank into the afternoon and stood on the sidewalk. Pizza, Declan said. Absolutely pizza. We ordered 2 pizzas and sat on the couch and did not talk very much and held each other, and I thought about the fact that for the first time since I was 22 years old, I did not owe anyone anything. Not a payment, not a check, not a performance of gratitude for things I had never received. Nothing. It was very quiet inside that feeling. Very still. I stayed in it for a long time. 2 weeks later, Declan and I started looking at houses. We had talked about it for a year in the abstract, the way you talk about things when debt makes them feel theoretical. Now it was not theoretical. We drove through neighborhoods on weekends with a list of addresses and a sense of moving towards something rather than away from it. The 5th house we saw was the one. It was a bungalow built in the early 1940s on a tree-lined street on the east side of Iowa City. 2 bedrooms. Hardwood floors throughout, worn smooth in the places where people had walked for decades, warm and golden in the afternoon light. A fireplace in the living room. A small backyard with an oak tree that was clearly older than the house. And a front porch with a wooden swing, the kind that moves with just enough creak to make it feel inhabited rather than neglected. We stood on that front porch and I looked out at the street and I thought, this is what it feels like to arrive somewhere. The asking price was $242,000. We offered $245,000. The sellers accepted the same day. Down payment, $65,000 from the settlement funds. Mortgage, $180,000. Monthly payment, $1,050. That's almost exactly what we were paying in loan payments, Declan said, looking at the mortgage estimate. I know, except this time we own something at the end of it. We drove past the house every weekend until closing. Sometimes we just parked and looked at it from the street. The front porch, the oak tree, the windows that faced east and would be full of morning light. Ours, Declan said one evening, sitting in the parked car in the early dark. Nobody else's, I said. No debts attached to it. No favors owed. No history of someone taking something and calling it family. He took my hand. We sat there a little longer. Tung. The second check arrived on a Wednesday, 6 weeks after the first. $81,000. Same bank check format, same formal printing, same memo line, settlement payment 2 of 2. Alongside it, tucked inside the courier envelope with no note, no letter, no explanation of any kind. Just my father's handwriting on a small label attached to a cardboard box the size of a jewelry case. Allegra Fletcher. I opened the box at my kitchen table. Inside, nestled in a fold of tissue paper that had been there long enough to take on the shape of what it held, was the ring. Silver band, simple and slightly irregular the way handmade things are. A deep purple amethyst, oval cut, catching the kitchen light and holding it. Small. Substantial. The ring my grandmother had worn on her wedding day, the one she had mentioned in her letter, the one she had said belonged to me. Your mother will want it, but it belongs to you. I picked it up, held it for a moment. Then I put it on my right hand, ring finger. It fit as though it had been sized for me. I sat at the table for a while looking at it. The afternoon light came through the kitchen window at an angle, and the stone caught it and threw it back in a small purple arc across the wall. She got it to you, Declan said from the doorway. Eventually. She always intended you to have it. She intended a lot of things for me, I said. Some of them took longer to arrive than she planned. I touched the ring with the pad of my thumb. The stone was cool and smooth. Wear it and remember what your grandmother said. You are worthy of every good thing. I'm starting to believe that, I said. Declan came and sat beside me. We looked at the ring in the afternoon light. It suits you, he said. It does, I agreed. I had been thinking about it since the day I sat in the conference room with the bank statements in my hands. My grandmother had intended to buy me freedom. The money was meant to give me choices, to let me begin my life without the weight of borrowed debt, to make it possible to build something that was genuinely mine. She had named it, in the letter, in the trust instrument, in the conversation she had with Father Calloway on the day she signed the papers. For Allegra, for her future. The money had been taken, but I had gotten it back. And now I had a decision to make about what to do with something that had been in the wrong place for 30 years and had finally come home. I kept enough to cover the house down payment, to rebuild our savings, to create the buffer I had never had, the small financial cushion that most people take for granted, and that I had spent my adult life one emergency away from not having. I kept enough to breathe. The rest, $130,000, I put into an endowment fund at the University of Iowa Foundation. I worked with the foundation's director over several weeks to establish the terms. The fund would be invested in perpetuity, generating approximately $10,000 per year in scholarship awards. The criteria were specific. The recipient had to be an Iowa resident pursuing higher education. They had to have no family financial support, whether due to estrangement, family circumstances, or a family that was simply unwilling to help. They had to be working to fund their own education. They had to be, in other words, who I had been. I named it the Rose Whitmore Education Fund. The first recipient was selected in late winter. Her name was Emma Vasquez, 19 years old, first-generation college student, journalism major, working 2 part-time jobs to cover her expenses. Her parents were in her life, but did not support her chosen path. They wanted her to take a different direction, a more immediately practical one, and when she had chosen school anyway, the financial support had ended. I met her in my office on a Thursday afternoon. She sat across the desk from me in a neat sweater, hands folded, with the particular posture of someone who has spent a lot of time trying to appear more settled than they feel. I recognized it. I had worn it myself for years. Emma Vasquez, I said, you've been selected for the Rose Whitmore Education Fund scholarship. She looked at me, blinked. I'm sorry, you've been selected. It's yours. She stopped. Her throat moved. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. Just listen for a minute. I leaned forward slightly. My grandmother left money for me to go to college. My parents took it. I didn't find out until recently, and when I did, I fought for it and got it back. And when I had it, I thought about what my grandmother had actually wanted, for someone who needed a door opened to have one opened. So that's what this is. This is the door. Emma's eyes had gone bright. She was holding herself very still in the way you do when you're afraid that moving will somehow break something. Use it, I said. Do the work. Build the thing you came here to build, And when you're on the other side of it and someone tells you that you worked hard for what you have, let them. You did. But also know that someone saw you before you got there and thought you deserved this. She pressed her lips together, nodded once, carefully. Thank you, she said. Her voice was small and entirely certain. Thank my grandmother, I said. She started this. On a Sunday afternoon in late winter, Miriam and Stuart Hartley's dining room held 10 people around a table that was technically designed for 8, Stuart and Miriam at either end, Paige and her husband beside them, Uncle Raymond, looking better than he had in years, his good jacket on, Father Calloway, who had accepted Miriam's invitation with what she later described as immediate and enthusiastic yes, Owen Blackwell, who had driven 3 hours for this dinner and would claim it was no trouble, Bryce Langford, who had taken the train, Declan, me, pot roast, mashed potatoes, green beans with almonds, fresh bread that Miriam had made that morning. It was loud in the way that good dinners are loud. Multiple conversations, someone laughing at the far end of the table, the particular warmth of a room where people have chosen to be together. Before we sat down, I asked if I could say something. The room quieted. I stood at my end of the table. I was wearing my grandmother's ring. I had worn it every day since it arrived. 6 months ago, I said, I got married in a chapel with 2 empty chairs in the front row. 4 months ago, my father came to my office with a folder full of documents he wanted me to sign so that I would officially pretend that 30 years of taking from me had never happened. I paused. 3 months ago, I learned that my grandmother had seen all of it coming, that she had tried to protect me, that she had left me not just money but a record, a letter, a witness, a trail of documented truth, because she knew that someday I might need to fight, and she wanted to make sure I had something to fight with. I looked around the table. Uncle Raymond, who had waited years for this conversation and hadn't walked away. Father Calloway, who had kept a promise made to a woman who was gone. Owen, who had driven 3 hours. Stuart, who had walked me down an aisle on 30 minutes' notice and meant every step of it. Miriam, who had moved a flower arrangement and called me her daughter-in-law before I was technically her daughter-in-law. I'm standing here in a room full of people who chose to show up, I said. Not because they had to, because they wanted to. And I want to say, I know that's what family is supposed to be. I know a lot of people have that without having to find it, but I didn't have it for a long time. And now I do, and I am not going to take it for granted. Uncle Raymond raised his glass. 2 rows. She would have loved this dinner. She would have insisted on making the pot roast herself, Father Calloway said. Everyone laughed. Miriam raised her glass. To family, she said. The kind we choose. To family, everyone said. We sat down. We ate. The room stayed warm and loud for the rest of the evening. I have not spoken to my parents since the day I signed the settlement, not because I made a formal decision to cut contact, more because the conversation that needed to happen, the one where someone acknowledges what was done and what it cost and what it meant, has not happened, and I have stopped waiting for it to. Some doors close not with a slam, but with a long, quiet click that you only recognize as final later. Cambria texted me once, weeks after our last call, to ask if I had forgiven our parents. I thought about it for 3 days. Then I texted back. Forgiveness doesn't mean keeping people in your life who have shown you, consistently, that they don't see you. I've forgiven them in the sense that I've let go of the anger I used to carry everywhere. But forgiveness and reconciliation are different things. I'm not waiting for them to change. I'm not holding my breath for an apology. I've moved forward, and that's what forgiveness means to me. Cambria didn't respond. I don't know what she did with that. I've made my peace with not knowing. What I mourn, and I do mourn it, I want to be honest about that, is not the family I lost. You can't lose what you never had. What I mourn is the family I should have had. The mother who should have looked up when I walked into the room. The father who should have come to the wedding, not to ask for something, but just because his daughter was getting married and he wanted to be there. The sister who should have been a partner rather than a beneficiary. I mourn the version of childhood that should have been mine. That grief is real, and I don't pretend it isn't. But I don't mourn the version of myself who kept waiting for them to change. That woman is gone, and the woman who replaced her, the one who wears her grandmother's ring and has zero balance on her student loans and a house with a front porch and a scholarship fund in her grandmother's name, that woman is not a consolation prize. She's the point. In the mornings now, I wake up in a house that belongs to Declan and me. Hardwood floors that creak in a specific pattern I have memorized. An oak tree visible from the bedroom window. Morning light that comes in from the east and moves across the floor as the sun rises, warm and unhurried. I make coffee. Declan grades papers at the kitchen table, or reads or talks to me about whatever he's thinking about, which is always something interesting. The ring is on my finger. The ring my grandmother wore when she married. The ring she kept for 40 years. The ring she promised to me before I was old enough to know I needed it. You deserve to be seen. You deserve to be chosen. She wrote that in a letter she sealed and left in a folder, trusting that someday I would open it, trusting that even if the worst happened, even if they took the money, even if they used it for someone else, even if I spent years not knowing the truth, I would eventually find my way to the fight she had prepared for me. She was right. I think about Emma Vasquez sometimes in her neat sweater at my desk, holding herself very still. I think about the student loan portal with the zero balance. I think about Stuart Hartley's hand on my arm at the entrance of the chapel, shaking slightly with someone else's righteous anger. I think about my grandmother at her kitchen table, 9 years ago in my memory, watching a 9-year-old girl practice being cheerful about a coloring book. She saw me then. She sees me still, I think, in whatever form seeing takes when someone you loved is no longer here. I was supposed to start my adult life free of debt. They took that from me. But I built something better than what they took. I built a life where I owe nothing to people who see me as a debt. A life where the people around the table are there because they want to be. A life where a little girl I've never met before will spend 4 years becoming a journalist without the particular weight of borrowed money pressing down on every choice she makes, because my grandmother left a trail of truth in a sealed envelope, and I had the nerve to follow it. The trust fund was supposed to buy me freedom. They stole it, but freedom, I've learned, is not something anyone gives you. It's something you take back. Thank you for staying with me until the end. If this reached you, if you've ever been the one who was told you were strong enough to need less, who smiled through the wrong Christmas morning, who sent money to people who only called to make sure it was coming, I want you to know, you were seen. You are seen. If Grandma Rose's letter made you think of someone who saw you when others didn't, leave their name in the comments. Let's fill this section with the people who showed up. And if this story moved you, please share it. Pass it to someone who needs to hear that what belongs to you, you are allowed to take back. I'll read every comment. If you want to hear more stories like this one, please subscribe. It means everything. Thank you for being here. Allegra.